Hey Raiders, what's going on? It's Jax, otherwise known as MyBettyWhite, and today we're going to talk about the healing add-on Vuhdo. I'm going to go over on how to set it up. I have completely wiped my Vuhdo so that I can show you how I set it up from bare bones. To do that, I went into reset. I reset everything. It reloads your UI. And at this point, we have the bare bones when you first install what Vuhdo looks like. So there's a private tanks and NPC panel. This is panel 2. There's panel 1, which is going to be your groups. I usually move this down into the center, and I'm going to talk about how to set that up. And then there's the buff watch, which I don't personally use. So first off, we're going to get rid of the panels that you don't want to use, and you'll go into move, and we're going to delete the private tank and NPC. We're going to actually keep the NPC. That's under special and NPCs. Then we hit OK, and at this point we can now drag panel 2 around, and it'll only show NPCs. This is good for fights where you have to heal an NPC. The buff watch, I don't use that, so I'm going to go in here to general and unselect that. That's in the buffs tab. And at this point, we're back into the normal. So like I said, I just started a fresh profile. I erased everything. So if you look in here, I have BittoGrid and Vuhdo-esque, which are their default profiles for Vuhdo. And now I'm going to make my own. So I'm going to name it Betty Disc 10 Up. And I'll tell you why I named it that. And then I'm going to hit save. I'm then going to apply this profile. And it's going to load the settings that I currently have set. Excuse me. So at this point, I want this to load when I'm in disc. And I want it to load if I have more than 10 people in my group size. So at this point, it's going to always load, and I'll do another one for 5-man that's just pretty much bigger and probably will grow horizontally. So let's set this up real quick. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to move. A lot of the times I'm in 30-man groups because I'm running LFR or something, and you'll notice that this is now growing from left to right. If we go into panels, and what I did there was I selected 30 and I hit test. Now when I come into panels, it allows me to see what the test panels would look like. So I don't have to be in a group to set this up. But I'm going to change the anchor point to the middle top. I'm going to center this. And the reason for doing that is because now when I go back to move and I go to my current and I go to test, you can now see that it grows from the center. So we'll go back to 30 and go back to panels. So one of the first things I'm going to do before I mess around with anything in the general tab is I'm going to go down to my hot icons and talk about these a little bit. So you'll notice that Power Word Shield and Atonement are set for slot 1 and 2. Now, currently, I have Show My Hots left at the bottom of Heal button, overlapping power bars. So I personally don't like that. You can choose this if you want them spread out, and you can choose the layouts here and move where the slots are. And the scaling of those slots. You can change the size of the icons, but personally I like mine below the bar, so I'm going to choose that icon. I'm also going to make sure that icons are checked and that text is checked, and then I'm going to leave this and I'm going to be in here. So now you'll notice that there's little spaces underneath my bars. I also like to have my Atonement show first and then my Power Word Shield, so I'll change them in the order, so it'll be in order left to right. It'll be Atonement, Power Word Shields. I don't use Echo of Light, but there are certain things that I might want to track in there. Like I may want to track my pain suppression. I also definitely want to track when a tank uses his cooldown, so I'll use tank's cooldowns extended. You can mess around with these. These all come from bouquets. Bouquets can be found in the general, and you can build them yourself. It takes a little playing around to figure out exactly what you're doing, but as long as you can find the spell name on Wowhead, which is going to be in the address bar. So it'd be wowhead.com, blah, 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 21385. That's the spell number. You can import whatever you want to into that and then go ahead from there. So now we'll go back to the general because I have that set up. And the reason I set that up first is because I don't want my bars to grow too big. So I prefer a loose ordering instead of grouped. If you're grouped, it'll show group 1 through pets on the right-hand side. I like to have mine loose, and I like to have mine show tank, melee DPS, range DPS, and healers. It's personal preference. go ahead and do what you prefer. I also like to have a max row of 5, max columns of 10. I like to hide the empty columns, and I like to have myself first, so I'm always at the top and I know where I am so I can heal myself. You can also change this to horizontal. If we're in group now, the groups grow this direction, but I do that for 5-mans. So at this point, we're pretty much set there. We can go to the sizing. I'm going to play with the scale just a little bit. I usually go to 1.15, and then I bring this panel up just slightly. But actually, I'm going to go back slightly down to 1.05, center this up again, and that looks about good. But I'm going to make everything a little bit wider, maybe a little bit shorter. There we go. So that looks good. I like the way that looks at the moment. I can change the appearance using the bars. You can change what they look like. I like the Vuhdo aluminum. Bar colors can be gradient to show green for top health and red for low health. Class colors are solid. I like mine to be class colors. Down in the headers, this has everything to do with the group headings, so we're not going to show those because we're going to be in loose. You can show what everyone's targeting. I find this not very useful unless I'm raid leading. Tooltips, I prefer mine to be to the right-hand side and show why I'm in fights and show spell info. This is a quick reminder of, oh yeah, my left and right click, this is what they're going to do. Text, you can play with the text. I like to have mine outlined with class colors. I like it to be a little bit bigger, and I like to be able to read what the text is, and I like to show what the total HP is. So that's all I really do on this one. Hot icons, we already sort of talked about. I'm going to take shield status off. Make sure you use icons and not glossy. If you use glossy, things get kind of hard to tell what is what unless you know what they are. The hot bars, I personally don't use them as disc, but they come quite in handy if you're playing a different class that has to track and you don't want to refresh your dot before, or your hot before it falls off. Save mana. Under miscellaneous, there's not a lot here. You can change what the overheal text looks like. So I'll show an example of overhealing real quick. We're going to hit OK. It's going to bring this back out. And now you can see that I overhealed myself for 17k. That's handy because, oh, I don't want to waste that mana. So, because that's going to be a major overheal. So we'll just change that a little bit, make the text a little bit bigger. And that's all we're going to do. That's pretty much shows what I want to see in just that setup. Now let's get into the more important things like debuffs. So under debuffs, I want to see all debuffs. By default, removable only is clicked. I don't want to ignore low duration because sometimes that'll what's called, but I do want to use icons. These icons are going to fly in. I wish there was a way not to have those fly in. You can ignore certain add-ons like the Chill of Throne or the Dungeon Sated. And you can add your own in here into your ignore list. I prefer to use an ignore list versus so it's more of a white list instead of a black list. We come down here into custom debuffs. We want to use icons, and we can also see our debuff list. So Death Wish is something that I definitely want to see. I want to see its icon. I want it to play a sound because Death Wish is very important to know when it goes off on like Zool, so I can either life rip the person back or dispel it and not get all the damage all at once. So Death Grip is something I want to make sure is in that list. If not, I could just add this number, which I found on Wowhead. Under visuals, you can change what the icon size is, where it's positioned. I'm going to have mine at the top right hand there. And you can have a no fade. That's pretty much all we're going to do with that. The next important thing is because I did a full reset here, all my spells are reset. And because I'm a priest, it's just assuming that I am a holy priest. So we need to add our spells back in here. I open my spell book. I like to have penance on my right click, and then I like to have Shadow Men on my left button there. I also like to have my most used Power Word Shield on my left and penance on my right. And I like to have penance on both of these. And that's just personal preference. That way I never miss a penance when I have to. If I'm holding shift, it's always on my right hand key. The menu button comes in handy. It allows me to set things just like I was to right click on somebody. Under control is where I like to keep my big cooldowns, so pain suppression. I also like to use purify on my control modifier. And you get the basic gist. Now, so you can set up to 16 mouse buttons here. If you have reassigned your mouse buttons like I have, and I like to have my barrier macro go off on the equals key, my mouse key back button, or button 4, is set to equals. I've rebound that outside of WoW. So at this point, we have that, and this will now, when I hit equals, go ahead and put my barrier out on top of me. Now I used a macro there. So one of the things you do need to be careful of is when naming your macros, make sure that they're not exactly named, because Leap of Faith here, if that M wasn't there for macro, the Leap of Faith, if I tried to put it in there, would cause an error. So we'll come back in here. Now let's get into the general tab. Personally, I don't do a lot here. I do hide empty buttons and empty frames, but I don't filter anything, because if you filter things, they'll drop out of your normal panel and drop into a special panel. So your private tanks, your own group, your focus, your target. That's something that I don't want to not be in my group. Now, we mentioned bouquets. Bouquets are groups of spells that will show up as a debuff or a buff or in your hotbars, and they'll show up in an order. So if Shield Wall was cast and then Last Stand was cast after that, it can't show both of these icons at the same time, so you have to put them into priority. So we'll do a new Atonement, and I'll show you how this works. So you name a new bouquet, you hit new, you now have this bouquet here, new Atonement, and I want to see, I'm going to add, and we'll type in the name Atonement here. Now at this point, it doesn't look like Atonement's actually up there. It shows Atonement, it shows a glossy icon, and that's because I have the default icon set as glossy. Now if I set it to none or default, the icon will show up. I want to see mine and others. I really don't want to see others, because why would I care to see other people's atonements? So this is where you can come in here. There's a lot of things that you can do, a lot of different spells you can bring in, and there's a lot already pre-built in. So also back in general is the Indicators tab. You can set any of your bouquets to use this also. So one of the things that is set by default is your boardy multi-aggro. So if somebody has aggro, this small red border will show up. You can change the width of that border and the texture. So now you'll notice that these are much bigger in red. I prefer to go 3 though, and that just lets me know that the tank has aggro. For my special dot, I use the raid icon, and the other thing in the mana bars, I like to change that to healers only, because I really don't care about other people's mana, but I do need to see other healers' mana. That's the gist of this add-on. If you have any more questions, maybe I can help you. I do recommend that you look at other people's setups and find what spells work best for you. Like I said, use your most used spells without a modifier, and then your modifier keys. You can use combos of modifier keys like Alt, Control, Shift. Somebody did ask me a question once on why when I heal somebody does it not select them and target them. That's under miscellaneous here, and you can target them. But as a Disc Priest, this is usually turned off because I need to keep my target on who I'm attacking because all of my heals come through damage. So if you enjoyed this, go ahead and leave a like. Tell me what add-ons you use, if you use a different one, and maybe I'll check it out and see. Or if you have any ideas for other add-ons you'd like me to do a spotlight on, let me know. And as always, remember to enjoy the raid.